Are criticisms dragging down your relationship? Here's what to do instead. Mended Light.
Woo!
All right, well, this is a new little series we're starting.
Yeah, okay. So we've been doing a lot on attachment theory. And if you haven't watched those videos, go back, watch those videos. It's part of this playlist. Super cool. I've read a few attachment books over the past year. I love all of them. I love how the concepts of different books that we've been reading come together.
They all support each other.
Right. The Real Love series, anything on attachment, Anatomy of Peace, right? It's all about how to create real love and connection in your relationships, any type of relationship. And then remove your personal barriers to real love, right?
Yeah.
Because we all have things that we think, this makes me unlovable, or we were told through behavior, not verbally, and so we subconsciously believe these things about me
are not okay.
Yeah, and
if
that's,
people only knew them, they wouldn't love me, and I have to put up a front.
Right, and that's why we have this whole movement of you're worthy, you are enough, right? Because we are all battling that battle, right? For real human connection and to feel really loved and like we belong. So in the book, Secure Love, there's different sections where she says, okay, instead of saying this, try saying this. And this was so helpful for me. And some of them were oh, okay, I can see that. That's not really a struggle I've had. And then other ones were oh man, can I take notes? Do I write this down on my hand?
Major game changer, yeah.
When I'm upset, I'm going to say. Anyway, so I wanted to bring some of those concepts and those ideas to you, our viewers. And one of the ways that we create connection or real love or secure attachment, whatever way you want to put it, is we express concern instead of criticism.
Yeah.
And if you've watched our other attachment videos, we talk about how criticism is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that the Gottmans talk about.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know what that is, like we said, go back and watch those other videos that are on that playlist. But we're gonna discuss some of those things of instead of this, say that.
Yeah, it's very practical. I love it.
And keep in mind, before you can be in the state of mind to express yourself differently, there's no shame in being I need to express conflict in a different way. Almost none of us learned this at home.
Right.
None of us learned okay, it's safe to feel my emotions. It's safe to know my needs. It's safe to express it in a healthy way. In our developmental years, there were so many barriers to doing that. So no shame, but we're here now and we can make a different choice if we want to.
And we do. So let's take a look at this. Sue Johnson, who was the founder of Emotionally Focused Therapy, said that love is a constant process of tuning in, connecting, reading and misreading cues, disconnecting, repairing, and finding deeper connection. It's a dance of meeting and parting and finding each other again, minute to minute and day to day. And my big takeaway from that is you're going to get it wrong sometime. I love the words that she used, repairing, right? Yeah. And reconnecting, reading and misreading cues. I mean, the fact is, healthy relationships aren't about getting it right all of the time. It's about returning to the baseline of getting it right.
Right.
You know?
And when someone doesn't get it right, that doesn't mean, oh, I'm not lovable or something's wrong with me. It just means oh, we had a disconnect. We had a misinterpretation. We were talking past each other.
Right.
We can get to a point of reconnection and repair.
All right. So, Alicia, you talked about criticism being one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
And the 4 horsemen meaning the 4 things that lead to the death of relationships. So the Gottmans call the cure for criticism gentle startup, whereas Julia Manano talks about concerns, addressing concerns. Basically, a criticism attacks the person. And a concern addresses a behavior. And it's getting distance from the two. Instead of, you're a jerk, it's, hey, you're showing up with more anger than normal, right? Just as an example. So we're going to talk about how to address concerns instead of lobbying criticism. So here's a criticism. The criticism is, why do you make a mess everywhere you go? How hard is it to pick up after yourself? So that's the critical version. Instead, try expressing a concern.
When things are left out, I have a hard time feeling settled and peaceful. It feels chaotic. Can we talk about this and try to find a supportive solution for both of us? So I chose this, instead of that, try this. Instead of this, instead of this, do that. Whatever we're doing. We're doing this and that, and who knows.
This is our first video of the morning, by the way. So we're getting our legs under us.
Anyway. No, but it's like, I don't know what it is, but like messy people seem to match with like
really organized people.
Yeah, like we attract our opposites, right?
Sure.
And it's like that's such a common, it's so relatable. Like it's relatable between us, right?
I'm far less messy than I used to be, for what it's worth.
For what it's worth. For what it's worth. Anyway, but so often, like, and you will have people who their personality type, very often a thinker, where they need the order and they need everything has its place and everything's in its place, right? And there's a healthy version of that, and there's an unhealthy version of that. That personality can lean too far into that, and they try to control their environment to create security in their life. And then the way they communicate that to their loved ones or their children is, my organization and my stuff is more important than you. And so it can show up in relationships that way. And it can be incredibly triggering. It doesn't mean that it's always triggering, but it can be, right? And so it's like, I get it. And so especially if like one person grew up in a home where the value set of a parent was clean and organized, and I literally can't think straight if it's not clean and organized. And then, for example, you have like a dreamer personality, and they're like, it needs to be fun and lighthearted and cats and rainbows on the wall. And to the thinker, it feels chaotic. And so you have these dynamics that potentially...
So as a quick example, I recently toured Pixar and showed you like offices that people had built. Like, this one looks like a jungle, like an Indiana Jones temple. This one looks like a submarine. This one looks like you're like, what did you say?
Yeah, so you sent me pictures.
Because I, as a dreamer, I'm like, I would love to work in Pixar.
Yeah, he was like, they could design their offices any way they want, and here's the Indiana Jones office, and he sent me a picture of it, and I was like, I would feel anxiety every single day going to work. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I feel like I work in a tomb? Like, that is anxiety inducing. It's not right or wrong, right? It's just different experiences, and really what it comes down to is different values. And then everybody is just trying to create comfort and safety for themselves. And then unconsciously, there's some sort of moral something attached to it. Like, it's right to be clean. It's right to be organized. And it's like, well, no, it's not a right or wrong. I mean, you get to certain extremes and it's like, well, that's not healthy, right? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a disconnect and the shame and the judgment that is often correlated to those disconnects that then make a little thing a big thing, and you're just like, why is this a big thing? So
addressing a concern instead of issuing a criticism eliminates that shame. And this is something that you've done really well. I remember there was a time when I would put the kids to bed and I'd tickle them and I'd play with them and I'd pray with them and I'd put them to bed. And you'd come in the morning and their clothes would be on the ground from when they changed into their pajamas. Because I'd be like, hey guys, get into your pajamas. And I remember you saying to me that you had a moment of redirecting yourself, because what you felt was that I don't respect you and I just leave messes for you to handle. And then you said, no, he's not thinking, I don't respect Alicia and she can just handle this. He's thinking, get in your pajamas, and once they're in their pajamas, he's focused on the tickle fights and reading the stories. And by the time he turns the light off, he's forgotten the clothes are even there. Yeah. And that is exactly what happened. Because anytime you'd be like, hey, the clothes are there, I'm like, I'm so sorry. And instead of a criticism of you always leave a mess or you never respect me, you said, if you could remember to make sure the kids' clothes from the day get in the dirty clothes hamper as part of your nightly routine, it would help me to feel loved and respected. That's addressing a concern. That's not a criticism, and that's a major change in the energy of that interaction.
All of these are such good points. And it's like so easy to just like discuss it in front of a camera and you're on the other side and you're like, doesn't feel that easy.
It's not easy.
And this is why we talk about a personalities course like all the time, because it's such an easy, and it's a construct, like so many things are constructs, but it's a helpful, supportive construct, I feel, most of the time. And if it becomes not helpful or supportive, then like don't use it. But it's an easy way to be like, oh, that is how I relate to the world. Oh, those are my needs. And oh, here's what I appreciate about this person that relates to the world completely differently. And here are those needs. And then here's where our needs are opposite and they meet each other, right? And then that's not even completely true. They don't meet each other, and that's the problem. And I was having a conversation with a family member about this because they were feeling a lot of disconnect and they were feeling like it was the other people or person's problem. And I was like, you guys just have a different set of values.
Yeah.
And you're missing each other, and you have to learn how to build the bridge between your values. And when I say that, it's not moral values, right? And so there are times where so often it becomes the fight about whatever the thing is, and it's not the expressing, the thinker expressing to the dreamer, like, I genuinely feel disrespected. I genuinely feel like my life is chaotic. I genuinely feel like you don't care about me. And it's like, oh, that's not the way those actions fit in my world at all, right? And so that understanding, but then once you have that understanding, you still have to build the bridge. Right? And it's so easy for one person to be like, well, that's just your problem. Or if you don't do XYZ thing, you don't love me.
Do you even love me anymore?
Well, and something I would say to that, because you might be asking, what's the difference between this and manipulation and gaslighting? And I would say it comes down to two things. Intent, like almost any relationship skill can be used for harmful manipulation. Yeah. There are all sorts of people who know how to use reflective listening and empathy, but it's without sincerity and it's with ulterior motives. So it's not actual empathy, right? It's performative empathy. The biggest difference then is, am I sincere? And two, am I making room for the other person's perspective?
Yeah.
Because with gaslighting, you're not. With gaslighting and manipulation, you're trying to edge out the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
And when you're making space for that and respecting it, that's when it's a healthy relationship.
And there's times, and this is really just a self-moderating self-growth, like how do I show up and support myself and the people I care about? And just two small things in this specific area. I realized that the way I was interacting with my kids about how they were picking up after themselves, taking care of their things, keeping their room clean was unhealthy. And I didn't feel like I could do it in a healthy way. And I literally stepped away from it for like 6 months. And it's not that I was like, okay, I'm never again going to expect them to keep their rooms clean, but I couldn't do it in a healthy way, right?
So here's another criticism we use. The issue we have in our relationship is solely because of your emotional unavailability. Whenever I attempt to discuss your feelings, you consistently shut me out and refuse to communicate anything with me. So that's the criticism. Instead of that, try this. It seems like we might be facing a bit of a challenge in our relationship, but I believe we can work through it together. I've noticed that at times I feel like there's a distance between us emotionally. I really care about you and I want to understand what you're going through on a deeper level, and I want to feel understood. Would you be open to sharing your feelings with me? I'd like to figure out a way for both of us to feel emotionally safe and connected. Now, hearing that, you might think, wow, that's a mouthful. The important thing is not word for word. The important thing is, what's the principle? Right? What's the concept? And the concept is I'm addressing a concern in a respectful way that talks about both of our needs, not in a way that lays it all at your feet or blames you.
Yeah, well, in a key principle through all of this is expressing the vulnerable emotion underneath, right? It's saying, okay, here's how I feel, and here's what I can see about what you feel or what I think you might feel. And here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Attachment theory, with all the different words and therapeutic language and all these things, it really just is the belief followed with the behavior of you are not the enemy. The problem is the enemy. You and I are on the same team. And I'm going to talk and interact with you like we're on the same team. Now, both partners need to be doing that. Because if one partner is showing up entirely in that space and the other partner is using manipulative or dysfunctional behaviors, like it can become imbalanced. But what was helpful for me was to hear the possibility of a conversation sounding completely different than I had ever thought of it sounding. And then after I had been introduced to that idea, in the moment when I was angry or frustrated, after I stopped and calmed down, I would say, okay, like, how do I express my actual needs? How do I get some kind of understanding of and perspective of their actual needs? And then how do I express that in a connecting way?
Yeah.
And you can do that, and you can be that person, and the other person can be so wounded and hurt, like they don't receive it, which can be challenging. It's not a foolproof way to handle things, but it does interrupt negative cycles. And while you need two people to perpetuate a negative cycle, you only need one person to interrupt it. And ultimately, the only thing we have control over is who we are and how we show up. And when we change who we are and how we show up, it makes it that much easier to give the other person the opportunity to do so.
We've got an entire little mini-series of Instead of This, Do That coming out. Next, we're going to address if you've got an anxious attachment style and you're showing up in conflict or communication in ways that you're pursuing and the other person wants to withdraw, what to do instead. So click on that as that pops up somewhere here.
It's going to be here.
And what we want to know from you of what we were talking about, how are you going to show up addressing a concern instead of a criticism? How does this open things up for you? What relationship are you going to apply this to, and how? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time,
keep shining. We need your light.